Davey, you've just stepped off the dance floor. Earlier today you were handling chickens. It's been a grand day out for you. But what the Conservatives are saying about you and your campaign is that you're just not serious.
Nothing could be further from the truth. When we've done a number of these stunts, we've had very serious messages. When I fell off the paddleboard in Lake Windermere, we were part of our campaign to end the sewage scandal, and the Conservatives have failed to do that. When I came down that slide with all those young people in half term, we were talking about mental health and how we wanted to look after the mental health of our children and young people. The Conservatives have failed. We have a positive programme to make sure there's a qualified mental health professional in every primary and secondary school. It couldn't be more serious. I'm afraid it's the Conservative Party who are a bit of a joke.
And yet, what the Conservatives are saying is that there are going to be lots of areas in parts of the country like this one where voting for the Liberal Democrats is going to give Keir Starmer a blank cheque. That's their words, that there will be so many Labour MPs that the Labour Party will run unfettered for the next 5 years.
Well, the Conservatives couldn't be more wrong. A vote for a Liberal Democrat is a vote for a Liberal Democrat, and we can beat the Conservatives in many seats across the home counties. Here in Surrey, we're doing really well. In the West Country, in large parts of rural Britain, Liberal Democrats are doing well. Frankly, the Conservatives have been a failed government, and they'd be a failed opposition too. They're a very divided party. They can't agree amongst themselves. Liberal Democrats could be a really strong force in the next Parliament, and I think that's much better for the British people rather than a divided, failed Tory party.
Certainly true, the Lib Dems could be a strong force. According to at least one poll, you're going to be the next leader of the opposition. Are you prepared for that?
Well, listen, there's the only poll that counts is on the 4th of July, and I'm not going to take the people for granted. One of my criticisms of the Conservatives is for so long they've taken people for granted, they've let them down. We're not going to do that. We're going to listen to people, put forward our positions on the health and care, our rescue plan for the NHS, our plan to tackle the sewage scandal, for example, and work all the way to 10 p.m. on the 4th of July. That's the moment. If we can beat lots of Conservative MPs across the South of England, the West Country, the SNP in Scotland, I want to beat some SNP MPs. I want to beat a Labour MP in Sheffield Hallam. If we have more Liberal Democrat MPs, I think that could transform our politics.
It's interesting because we were on that farm earlier and I had the privilege of speaking to the farmer for quite some time, and she was telling me that she's been really struggling to diversify her farm, to try and turn a bit of it into a campsite, to try and convert some buildings. She's run up against the local council here. She has had opposition after opposition from local voices. And to some extent, it often seems that the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats in this part of the world almost compete with each other to try and stop people building things.
Well, I spoke to that farm owner, and she was amazing. She was saying it was the national park which was the real problem, and it's clearly there needs to be a more flexibility when we're talking about sustainable farming. What was really impressive about that farmer, and let's remember Britain has some of the best farmers in the world, if not the best, she was trying to do the right thing, diversifying, as you were saying, farming sustainably, enabling people to come and enjoy the countryside in a really environmentally friendly way. People should be backing farmers like that.
They should, and yet in her area there was a local campaign to stop her having a campsite on her farm, to stop her converting her barn. All of these things that seem to be running up against growth in the country. Is it not the case that perhaps, looking at the way that the country has been governed, both when you were in government and with the Conservatives and with the Labour Party before them, in some ways we have the most regulated and arbitrary system of approving development, and that's holding us back?
Well, the Conservative approach, which has really dominated the last few years, has been a developer-led approach, and that's caused a lot of reaction to people because they haven't felt that the infrastructure is going along with the housing. They haven't had the social infrastructure in terms of more GPs or school places. They haven't had the physical infrastructure in terms of water.
Do you think too many things have been built in Britain?
No, I just think they've not been built in the right way. And what Liberal Democrats are saying, let's take a community-led approach. If you do that, you can get the houses and the right sort of houses in the right places, and you can get that infrastructure, whether it's the health infrastructure, the education infrastructure, or the transport or water infrastructure. I think when people are offered that as a programme, they're much more likely to accept the houses that we need.
You mentioned water infrastructure, and yet one of your MPs is one of the most prolific campaigners against a new reservoir in her part of the world, the Abingdon Reservoir, which the water companies have been trying to build, and your local politicians have been campaigning against.
Well, we've been campaigning for an alternative, and that's a way of bringing water in areas that are very rich in water, got plenty of water, more than they need, through rivers and canals into areas that need more water. So there are more than one ways of doing it, and we're putting forward a much more positive approach, which is much more environmentally friendly.
So you don't accept that you've been a blocker in some ways, your party in local government has been a blocker to some of that economic growth that the country's been desperately lacking?
Well, let me give you an example from my own constituency. My wife is on the council. She's in charge of housing, involving planning, and she is leading the largest council house building programme for over 40 years. We're seeing an estate completely regenerated, and we've got lots of support for that. We actually put it to the residents, and we got I think it was an 84% turnout. We got a 73% yes for the council plans. You can take people with you to regenerate and build more houses. It's the way you do it.
Now, you're talking about rivers today, you're talking about pollution, and particularly these chalk streams, and you want to create a new blue flag status. What is that?
Yeah, I mean, the chalk streams in the UK, and particularly in England, are very precious. 80% of the world's chalk streams are in England, and some people have called them England's rainforest, so they're really important. And unfortunately, the government and the regulator have allowed the water companies to pump their filthy sewage into it. And we have a solution to that, part of our programme to tackle the sewage scandal, and that's saying that we would have blue flag status. That would mean they'd be monitored better, the rules would be tougher, and we'd be sure that if you went bathing them any time in the year, that would be clean blue water. Other countries have managed this. Don't see why we can't.
Is it not the case that other countries don't have creaking Victorian infrastructure, and that really, in order to stop sewage overflows, it's going to be incredibly expensive? We're going to build new super sewers in order to have to do that. That's going to cost billions of pounds.
Well, actually, I think there's an awful lot that can be done relatively quickly on some of the worst cases, so you have a big impact quite quickly. But you're right to say that this is going to take a little while to turn around, and there's going to have to be some big investment. What's happened is the regulator and the government have been so soft on the water companies. They've allowed them to borrow billions of pounds, pay their shareholders huge amounts in dividends, pay their executives huge amounts in bonuses, and not made the investment that we're talking about.
The amount they're paying to their executives is tiny compared to the amount that they'd have to invest to overhaul the entire water infrastructure.
But Tom, I was talking also about the dividends, and I think you'll agree, they've paid huge amounts of dividends out rather than the investment that was needed.
Mainly to pension funds.
Well, actually, to lots of different people who've benefited from that. What they should have been doing, what their job to do, was to invest in the infrastructure, just as you said, actually. And I think it's shocking, and I think the British public are shocked and appalled that they've been allowed to make these massive profits, take it out of the industry rather than investing. And now I want to make sure that the regulator is tough enough to force them to make that investment.
Do you think that it's offering, to some extent, easy solutions, saying we can just stop this? I mean, this isn't a costed policy in terms of all of the different changes that would need to happen physically to that infrastructure. You're sounding a bit like this is sort of wishful politics.
No, I don't want to move away from the fact that this will be tough. That's why we want a tough regulator. We want to bring all the powers of the current regulators, which are dispersed, into one new regulator called the Clean Water Authority. We want to invest in new monitors for them to make sure they hold the water companies to account. We want to say to the water companies, if you keep polluting, we're going to have a sewage tax on your profits. We want to say that the water industry should be restructured so that they have to put public health and the environment ahead of profit.
Can you guarantee people's bills will not go up as a result of that? All of those impositions upon these companies, can you guarantee that people's bills really won't go up if they have to spend all that money?
Well, at the moment, the Conservative government and Ofwat are proposing huge hikes in people's water bills. You're absolutely right.
And your plan would be even higher.
No, they wouldn't, because I think the regulator and the government have been really weak on the companies. Companies who've made huge amounts of money over the last, several decades, and it's about time that they had to cough
Some of
up.
these companies are going bankrupt.
Well, some of these companies need to make sure they're doing the right investment. If they're not prepared to do it, they need to sell it to someone who is. And our model, which is a mutual model, which has been used in other countries, used in many states of America, in North America. The model we're proposing is used in many places, and it's provided the investment, the stability, and it's sorted out the water infrastructure. So it can be done.
Well, Ed Davey, thank you very much for sitting down, and thank you also for sharing some of your dance moves a little bit earlier on. Really
Don't think I'm going to be invited onto Strictly anytime soon.